Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look for ways we can work together to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ. Today, we have with us Dr. Joe Malone. He has a PhD in health and human performance from Middle Tennessee State University. He has taught there at Middle Tennessee State. He's also taught at Vanderbilt and Princeton. And if you check into his background, you'll find he's done a lot of work in the area of sexual integrity and doing all that he can to help people today to live lives of sexual integrity. So, Dr. Malone, it's so good to have you here with us today on the Better Together podcast.
It's an honor to be here, Eddie. Thank you for having me.
Hey, let's start out by, we've got a culture that says sexual integrity does not matter, really a sexual hookup culture, if you will. That is the wrong message, not just from the Word of God, but also from a scientific standpoint as well, isn't it?
Correct. Yes. And that's what got me into this field. Was I actually was working with a bunch of college students at Middle Tennessee, and I had created actually a college women's wellness program. And long story short, they were having problems, with their fitness levels and having time enough to do it on campus. The food was a bad situation for them on campus, but this thing they called hookup culture was, I realized right away that it was the most destructive element in their life. And that's when my studies, my research, my PhD went in that direction. I ended up with a specialization in sexual wellness. So yes, that was my observation quickly. And then the other thing I realized was that there was very few people that were working on this, working against it. And what was discouraging, as a secular university that I was on, the administration was actually at least implicitly, supporting it with the way they had orientation set up, with the condom, the giving away of the condoms, and the instruction that if there's any problems with anything, that they could come to the student health center. The message was that it was normal to be sexually active and practice casual sex, and here's how we can fix it, when you have problems. But my observation of the young women, particularly that I was working with, was there was so much heartache, so much heartbreak, and so much depression and anxiety. And the studies have borne that out since.
Yeah. And so it has a detrimental effect on so many different levels. And what they're actually getting from the people that should be helping them is the opposite of the message they should be receiving. But it looks like that launched you into this area of sexual integrity, where you're trying to help, especially young people, to stay out of that particular level of destruction.
Yes. I've been speaking to college students, especially Christian college students across the country. Also working with pregnancy help center staffs, because they've got a lot of young women coming to them, and they don't really know how to advise them on how to prevent the next situation from arising. And then I even had some Sunday school parents in my church that I was working with, where their 7th grade children were being taught. It's from a book called The Purity Code. I've got a copy of it right here. Anyway, they were being taught, see if I can get that in there, but they're being taught out of that, while at the same time I was teaching their parents. I phrased it this way: they were learning basic math, basically, of sexuality, and I was teaching the parents algebra, or you could even say calculus, I guess, at the level of complexity I was teaching them. It seemed to go really well. The parents felt more empowered to speak, to talk with their child once we were done. And there was all kinds of things that came up in the class. A lot of frustration from the parents as far as trying to keep, porn away from their children, and the way it is these days with the iPhones, and just the overall, craziness and sexuality that's going on out there.
So let's talk, first of all, like to some of those kids, some of the younger adults even that you've worked with in the past. What kinds of things do you suggest to them or help them to think about so that they could be pure, so that they could maintain sexual integrity?
The first thing I try to get across, Eddie, is that science backs what they're being taught and have been taught all their lives. God's design for our relationships. And I can actually prove it to them. I actually take them through a lot of scientific proofs of it, the way our bodies are built compared to other species. And there's a whole gamut of things that scientifically prove that we are designed by God to be monogamous. The other thing is, I talk them through kind of their own experiences, and especially like the young women. Again, the young women, I think, have been most hurt in this society with, ironically, radical feminism and then the sexual revolution. I talk to them about their sexual nature is not to be promiscuous. And again, there's all the scientific proofs we can give, but the way that men fall in love, I inform them of this, the way that young men fall in love is not by having casual sex ahead of their marriage. It's actually by the old school way of premarital chastity. And there's literally this hormone in the brain called vasopressin that will not form up. It won't form receptors in the brain with a young man if he's sexually active with this young woman that he's attracted to. So that's huge news to many of the girls and young women. And I think it makes a real big positive difference for them to realize that there's scientific rationale to what they've been taught, by their church and also by their parents all their lives. And actually that way of going about it has rewards of having committed relationships to develop out of it, and then eventually engagement and then marriage. Because I did a study at our place, secular university, Middle Tennessee State, and 97.48% of them answered that they wanted to get married someday. So near 98% in a secular environment. So, and then there's some other interesting results too. The vast majority of them were against more hookup culture in our society. They're like above, right around 80% were against any more hookup culture. And then about 90%, 96% were for more romance and true love. So again, very telling statistics in a secular environment. So we have those desires going while we have this hookup culture that's being pushed on them basically by society. So yes, the young women, especially like I think hearing that, the way they've been taught, and again, the way they see their parents, hopefully, and then maybe their grandparents and even great grandparents, the patterns of their lives have worked, and they've worked for a reason.
Absolutely. So sometimes they're often told by some people that you need to engage in the hookup culture in order to get someone. And basically what your data is showing is it doesn't work that way. And really what the data is suggesting is deep down, everyone wants really what the Bible has taught all along: monogamous relationships, purity until marriage. That's kind of the attitude that people, that they want to get married and want to be with one person, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I found is a very deep and full, I guess you'd say, current of that out there, even on the secular campuses. I would think it'd be even greater, on the Christian campuses. But getting back to your point about being advised that you have to be sexually active to get somebody, I've had two young women come up to me, that I was working with, student types, and they told me that one of them, their dad had told her she had to be sexually active to get a guy, and the other one was her mother that had told her that. And in both cases, the parent that told them that had messed up in the marriage, had cheated in the marriage, and had messed the marriage up. But I found that so discouraging to think that there's young women that are being told that kind of thing by their parents even. And so, and let alone the situation they have on campuses, it's just, you wouldn't believe some of the craziness I ran into on the secular campus. But anyway, yeah, the Christian students that I've spoken to, which again, getting to be a lot now, because I think the people that are the gatekeepers for them realize I'm trying to reinforce with science what they're being taught and have been taught their whole lives. And in comparison to what's going on out there, it's just such a contrast what I'm doing. And there's anybody else that I know of. Well, there may be a few people out there doing it, but not many people that I know of are taking this approach. And a little research that you're probably aware of, again, with your background, I know you know most of this thing, what I'm saying, but about 50% of Gen Z and even the millennials before them that are Christians want to have they want to be able to, when they talk with their friends, they want to have scientific support for what they're sharing with them Christian wise. So I think this can only help. I haven't seen it hurt at all. It can only help.
Yeah. And they hear certain things from science. They hear a lot of messages about science, but when you really get down to real science, as you are, what you're seeing is real science backs up the scripture. And that's what you bring to the table, what you're reading in your Bible about the marriage bed and so forth is true scientifically. And I appreciate what you're doing there. I know there's people yelling and saying, you're talking a lot about the women. What about the guys? So let's talk a bit about them, why they need to also be men, young boys of sexual integrity.
Well, they need it even more than the girls do, the women do, because they benefit so much more from it. A young man, just off the top of my head, a man that is in a marriage and loses their marriage for whatever reason, gets divorced. Well, I'll give you his statistics on dying of all causes in a minute, but a woman that happens to, that becomes single or is single, in her lifetime, has a 50% greater chance of death by all causes. A man, a young man or man, whatever age, that happens to become single has a 250% greater chance of death by all causes. So right off the bat, as far as your well-being goes, men have a lot more to gain. A woman generally brings a whole social group with them into a marriage and that type of thing. And so guys, when they lose that, if and when they lose that again, that's a huge health factor that's missing for them. It's a huge balancer for men, because young men that are competitive with each other, and particularly if they're in the mating hunt, their testosterone levels are extremely high. The highest level in their lifetime is at 17, and it just barely starts going down a little bit, after 30. And testosterone levels, as you probably know, and maybe some of your audience knows, high testosterone levels are detrimental to men's health over long periods of time, or any creatures. That's why deer in the fall, when they're in the rut, they have antlers, and that's the result of high testosterone levels. And the antlers fall off after the rut because their testosterone levels go down. Well, humans are similar that way, in that when they're competitive and when they're chasing women, so to speak, their testosterone levels go way up, much higher than they would be normally. And once they commit, though, once they maybe get a girlfriend, it drops, their testosterone levels drop. Engaged, drop some more. Marriage, drop some more. And then when they start having children, it really drops. It drops like by 50%. And so again, specifically, testosterone is an immune suppressor. So it suppresses the immune system. That's one reason that men don't live as long as women on average. But also, estrogen is an immune enhancer. And that's one reason that most people who have immuno type diseases, where the immune system attacks itself, are women. 75% of them are. So there's some biochemistry behind what we're seeing and what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, that they need to know. And so for boys and young men, that pathway of, looking for a great lifelong mate, finding one, committing to that young woman, having children, getting a job, and living the lifestyle that the Bible prescribes, is a win-win for everybody involved. It's a win-win for him. It's a win for her. It's a win for the children. It's a win for the country, and really for the world.
Yeah. Our forefathers saw that too, didn't they? They pushed, or Ben Franklin, there's a quote about him saying, a guy without a wife is not good, and so, yeah, it's good for all the way around. That's great. That's great information. So what you're trying to do is educate people. What the Bible has taught you is correct, and it's probably correct more than you could ever imagine or think. A lot of people, or a lot of parents, are listening now, and they're thinking, but how do I convey that to my kids, to my grandkids? And so I know you've done a lot of work with that as well, especially in the church. And so tell us some things that we can do as parents and grandparents to get that message across to our kids and grandkids.
Well, again, I think it was helpful to the parents that I worked with in our church to kind of have that group and have me instruct them, but also to kind of have a support group that developed a middle school parent support group, I guess you could call it. That was a Christian middle school parent support group. And one thing that came out of it was that the parents of this middle schooler, who previously hadn't known who the parents of their child's friend were, they were both in the class, and so they got to know each other, and so it became a team effort as far as the parenting team goes for that group of kids, that group of middle schoolers and that type of thing. So that's one thing that I observed, is I think a church that was able to put together the parents of this difficult time in life for anybody, for all of us, this middle school, and then maybe even into high school. That's a huge advantage if you can help them to get to know each other and that type of thing. But then the other part of it for them, I think, was they became much more comfortable with the topic and their expertise level on the topic. They felt real confident in being able to talk to their children. And even in, what's changed in the quote unquote talk is that these kids these days, hopefully that not many of our kids have been exposed to porn and that type of thing, but statistically, probably a lot of them have. And so, and if not, they've been around kids that have been exposed to it, and, all the different things that are discussed amongst them, and that I think that it gave them a lot more confidence in dealing with a much more difficult, I think, culture that we have going now. So those are the types of things I would recommend, is maybe organizing as a church around when your children, the parents around when your children are coming into that age. And, people will tell you, oh, you got to start at 5th grade and that type of thing. I think about around puberty is about right, to start in on an organized approach. But I really think that's maybe a good idea to 6th, 7th grade, right in there. I would encourage other churches to give that a chance as far as having a parents group. And then if they have somebody, that has expertise in the area and has a heart, like my heart is, to use sex ed knowledge to not sexualize them, but to desexualize them, to help them find this pathway toward marriage, strengthen the pathway to and through marriage. That's kind of my major goal. Put them to work on that, because again, it helps. We had 8 weeks in that class, and it helps everybody. 8 like 1 hour Sunday school sessions. It helps everybody to become less stigma to talking about it with their children or anybody else, in that way, where the goal is a noble and ethical and a biblical and Christian goal, is to, as far as how this gift that God's given us is to be used properly.
So they can help each other as well. And there's a little bit probably of a Titus 2 effect, where now it's parents are in this thing together. And so it could also be that you're trying to help my kid, I'm trying to help your kid. And by us helping each other's kids out a bit, we're really helping everyone within the church here a bit. So that's a great idea. And especially getting someone on board like you that could help and bring some information, some important information to the table.
Yes. So, and one thing, if I could add to that, Eddie, the youth pastor was involved on the other end of it. He was working with the 7th graders, again, from this book called The Purity Code. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a 2-pronged effort. And so and the parents were reading this book at the same time. Plus I was teaching them, the kind of the bigger picture. And so I think overall it was a real effective way to approach it. And I don't know, a way frontally to approach it, and get away from, hey, this is a topic nobody wants to talk about, and we're all, avoiding it and that type of thing. And also, again, like you said, making a team thing on the parents' part, team with me helping kind of coach them, and then the youth pastor coaching and working with the kids themselves.
That's good. So you've done a lot of work with sexual integrity, a lot of work on college campuses, and also working with churches. What are you doing right now that you can share with us?
Well, a lot of work in those areas, but also there's this other area, the Pregnancy Help Center. I mentioned them earlier. There's the staffs. I'm traveling around, actually going to Florida soon. In the next 2 months, actually, to work with a whole group of them down there. And they're very interested in getting the overall picture of this. these things I talked about earlier, where the males fall in love differently than females, and the biochemical system and the anatomical differences and all that. They want to be able to be authorities when they deal with these girls and young women that are coming to them, that they're helping to make a decision for life, rather than abortion. Because 86% of the abortions are chosen by unwed mothers, so we have an abortion problem in this country, obviously, and have had for a long time. 63 million, I think, is the count right now. But we have and had for a while, again, along with the sexual revolution and the radical feminism, about the time those things hit, it's gone from there. We have a marriage problem, with the numbers of marriages that aren't happening. They're forecasting 1/3 of this young people's cohort, the Gen Zers and millennials will never get married. And I don't know if our society can handle that kind of a number, on that. And then all the cohabitation and, so what I'm trying to do with them is really help them get expert, I guess you'd say, on all of this. Because a lot of these pregnancy help centers these days are near or on college campuses. They're kind of in the belly of the beast, so to speak, as far as the abortion culture goes. So they need to have the up-to-date, and as you said earlier, the real science on it, because there's so much false called science, but it isn't at all. The whole gender ideology and social construction of sexuality and gender, the things that they're teaching on the college campuses are blatantly false, and they're taking them down a pathway that, they're going to look back with regret on, and a lot of them already are. So that's been a lot of my work as well. So Christian colleges, Christians on colleges. I was at the University of Alabama, and my wife always goes with me too, because she sings, and so she's a professional singer. So we're going to try to offer that, but I think it's just good for them to see, when I start to give these talks, they see us together. We've been married 45 years, and they kind of see the product. In fact, I tell them, hey, we want to try to get you guys to where Jody and I are right now. Our marriage hasn't been perfect, and mostly because of me, but the products we've got, my kids right behind me on the wall there, who now have kids that size themselves. And just all the rewards, as to getting married, having children, creating a family, and just and then the onward, the family that comes from that is so rewarding. And I compare it to my bachelor's degree. It tops my master's degree, it tops my PhD. It's more important than anything else in my life, other than my commitment to Christ. So that's the level that I think we need to look at our marriages, and especially if there's a lack of marriage, and if somebody that wants to be married, and there's a ton of, I think, young people these days that want to be married, but because of the situation we're talking about, they're intimidated out of it, and circumstances just they keep getting older, and the pool, the eligible pool keeps getting smaller and smaller, and so that's another thing that when I'm on campus, it's kind of radical of me to suggest, but I tell them there's a lot of advantages scientifically to getting married younger. And when I mean younger, I mean maybe in the early 20s or so. Just cancer risk and all that for the woman is really dropped by having children younger and having lots of them, and breastfeeding, all that type of thing. So and it's also helpful to them to not run out of guys, that are eligible marriage partners and that type of thing. So that's what's happening to a lot of them, I'm seeing these days.
Yeah, that's good. So what you're trying to do is, you've been blessed. None of us are perfect, as you mentioned, but it's been a good life for you and your wife and your children. And that's really what we're trying to pass on to others, that they can have the real life that the Lord would have for them. And it's a far better life than what the world is trying to sell to them. So, hey, I just applaud you, and I appreciate what you're trying to do, and on college campuses, and our life centers, and also in churches throughout America. Thank you for what you're doing, Joe. And we just wish you Godspeed as you continue on. And how can our listeners get more information about you? Where's the best place for them to go?
Well, there's a couple of places. One would be my personal website, drjoemalone.com. And then another would be our social media groups. It's called Romance Revival on Instagram, which is probably their kids would probably be familiar with Instagram if they aren't. And then same name, Romance Revival, on Facebook. So those areas would be probably great to try to connect with us. And by the way, on those social media sites, we're trying to use them to encourage the young people that are on them to revive romance, and as opposed to hooking up. And the tagline is finding real love, because that's what I found that they're looking for. Almost all of them, they're looking for real love and being frustrated in their efforts, but they want romance. They want the old school approach. It's just that they're in a tough society for it, and there's people don't want to stand up and let their real wishes be known right now. But I think if we keep working on it, there'll be a wave of young people that will start saying, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of this hookup culture stuff, and want to get back to what's real, and want to get back to the way we know that God designed us to actually live.
Good job. Well said. Well, thank you for joining us today, Joe. Thank you for the good work you're doing. And we encourage you listeners to take this podcast, if you can, share it with someone that would benefit. If you could, write us a nice review wherever you get your podcast. Remember, every little bit counts. And really, also remember, when we truly work together, we truly do accomplish more for the cause of Christ. Thank you for joining us today.